am 41, and I say my age because I am so jealous of the Bangladeshi diaspora right now who are like in their late 20s, early 30s. My God, the way you guys have events. Hi, I'm Jennifer Chowdhury. I'm an independent journalist. I've always known I wanted to write about my people, my community, and I didn't know how to get there, but I did get there. And so I think the thing I'd be the most proud of is the fact that I spent about 2 to 3 years in Bangladesh as a foreign correspondent. Yeah, so I started off actually in fashion journalism, oddly enough, but I always wanted to tell stories, like I said, about like people of my background and people whose stories have not been told widely. And so I kind of tried to find any in, and so I started writing for a lot of like mainstream magazines like Elle magazine, Marie Claire, a lot of women's fashion magazines, but I found stories about people like me, right? Like, for example, when I was coming up in journalism, there was a lot of conversation on modest fashion, like hijab and things like that. And so I did a lot of stories about that. And then eventually, I went in and did a lot of other types of stories, talking about immigration, talking about arts and culture in the Asian American community and the South Asian community and the Muslim diaspora. And so slowly I have built this portfolio with all these like really amazing bylines if you look at it, right? The New York Times, The Guardian, NPR. However, there's always a limitation when you try to tell your stories through mainstream media, and that's why I launched Port of Entry, which is a newsletter, a social media platform where I take the experience that I've gathered in like the last almost 2 decades and tell the stories that get overlooked by media. So I think that being a part of the model minority, right, like South Asians fit, and Bangladeshis fit into this community that is known in America as the model minority. And, as someone who was born in New York City in the 80s and grew up here in the 90s, sort of like early-ish Bangladeshi diaspora, I would say, we had to fit a mold. We had to go to school, get good grades, always be at the top of our class, choose a career that makes money. So right there is where my values started, because I don't know if you guys know, but journalism doesn't make a lot of money. You have to really hustle and have to figure it out. It is a passion career. Not that I'm saying you can't, be successful, but it takes a lot. And so you're not following the straight and narrow path. You have to do a lot of things, sort of go off the beaten path to get things done. And that's not a value I feel like I was taught growing up by the greater society. My parents is a different story. I had one parent, my father, who was very much like, do what your heart desires. And my mom was like, we have to have stability, right? So I had these two competing storylines in my life. But I am really happy that I did follow an unconventional path, and I failed a lot along the way, but now I can say that at this stage of my career, everything that I do for money, for pleasure, for passion is definitely aligned with how I see the world. So in a traditional sense, I have grappled a lot with failure. Every time I've set out to do something and it didn't work out, I have beaten myself up. And that's such a common thing, especially when you're really young, that you do, because I think we're not told that everybody fails. It takes so many tries to get something right, but we're only told the success stories. I'll give you one example from like early on my career and kind of like recently. So like I said, I started off in fashion magazines, and when I was in college, the path to get into any kind of job, but definitely to media, was unpaid internships at the time. And my dream magazine was Marie Claire magazine at the time. This is like 20 years ago. It was like the one of the most successful magazines. If you got in there, you were golden. So I got an interview and I got the internship, except this is the lesson of being first generation, first child to be born outside of your homeland where you don't know anything and there's nobody to guide you. When I learned that it was unpaid, I was like, what? Why would I work for free? Which in hindsight, I'm like, wow, I really knew my value that I didn't want to work for free, but I didn't understand the system, which is that you work for free until you get a paid job, because especially fashion media is a very privileged space. And first generation child of working class immigrants, that's not usually the profile that went there. So I turned it down. I turned it down. And right after I turned it down, I think I spoke to one of my professors and they were like, this is exactly where you want it to be. It's the features department to write like the long stories you want to write, your dream magazine, you gotta go back and get it. And of course, this editor was like, no. And then I tried so many times after that to get an internship, because I think I was in like my second year of college or something. They were probably like, is this girl crazy? She turned us down. So, and I thought it was over. I was never going to write for them again. And the reason why I loved them so much is because when they were a print magazine, they were the only women's mainstream magazine where you can open up the middle of the magazine and see stories about women all over the world. So it was the first time I saw stories about Bangladesh, like Bangladeshi women in a fashion magazine, and it didn't have anything to do with textile workers. It had like nothing, it was just an international story about their lives. And I was like, that's what I want to do. Well, fast forward a little less than 10 years and I ended up writing for them regularly. So, you know, you can fail at something and then you learn along the way. For 10 years, I was so adamant. I'm like, na ami ekhane like dhukboi, jemne hok. I will do it, and I figured it out. But I had to fail first to understand the value of a position like that. Yeah, I'm gonna start that question with saying that I am 41, and I say my age because I am so jealous of the Bangladeshi diaspora right now who are like in their late 20s, early 30s. My God, the way you guys have events, the way you guys are all over killing it. Yes, sure, you also have social media in a way that we didn't, elderly millennials didn't, but there's just so many more of you. And for me, us, it wasn't like that. We were so scattered everywhere. And, you know, I grew up in a household where I was told to be very proud of like where I come from. I was taught Bangla fluently, you know, I was forced to speak it at home. I'm very glad that that was enforced. But then I had my peers, like family, friends, cousins, who were like, oh, I want nothing to do with being Bengali. So I was known as the girl who was like obsessed with my brownness. And I wished that I had like more of a community. But I had to navigate that. Like I had to navigate it within the community with being like, oh, you only date Bengali guys? You only like, you want to marry a Bangla boy? Why? You know, like things like that. And then, oh, like you're so obsessed with like Bangladesh. You're so obsessed with being Bengali. And I was like, you know why? Because I grew up in Queens where I see Latinos, I see, you know, Black communities, I see every other community being so proud of who they are, except us. And I think that's changed a lot. But yes, I had to definitely navigate these two worlds. And then professionally, when I was in all white spaces, because that's what media was and still is, definitely I had to like kind of like leave that identity a little bit at the door, but I didn't. I will say this about myself, that I didn't. And I think it's held me back a little bit in my career early on because I was seen as like the reporter that only reported on South Asia, only wanted to report on like Asian America or Muslim issues. And sometimes I would get really upset because I'm like, you know, if you can report on this, you can report on anything. But because I had built this brand for myself before building a brand was a thing, that I got stuck in that. But now it's all working out for me. So I'm glad I was proud of my background and all of that. Oh my God. So my dad, the reason why we ended up outside of Bangladesh is because my dad was a young Maulana Bhashani follower, and I don't know if you know who that is. Those of you, I think there's a resurgence of his politics right now, and I won't get too much into it. Look him up, really interesting guy. And so when Bangladesh, you know, became Bangladesh in the beginning years, there was no place for him, you know, because, you know, My grandfather was an attorney, and he was like, this is my youngest son, I need to get him out of the country. I can't like bail him out of jail every week because he's doing like nonsense activism. I consider my dad like one of the OG socialists, and so I grew up on socialist values, right? And so even though, we grew up in the US, in New York City, like the capital of capitalism, I was always taught a lot of socialist values. I was taught to rail against class. I was taught to be unified, with other communities. And that really, really comes from my dad. And I didn't really understand this like Pashani politics because I just heard it being flung around in my house all my childhood. I was like, who is this dude? Like, what is the big deal? But as I got older, I understood why that was such a big pillar in my household. And my dad's like dream is for me to like write a book on him and like make a documentary and everything about this guy. But like it is so interesting the things you don't know, and then you grow up and you realize that is such a important part of your upbringing. And I think for my mom was a child bride. She got married at 15, very common at the time, right, in the 70s in Bangladesh. And she left like her whole family behind. And so I really learned the value of loyalty because she told us so many stories about my aunts, her sisters, her parents, and everything. And I think that's also where like sort of my love for being Bengali and like Bangladesh in general comes from, because she would just talk about like her childhood with so much animation. She was like the original storyteller in my life. And so I think these are the two sort of values I was brought up with, like a lot of love and loyalty for your community, and also the ethics of socialism. I was told so many times not to do it, even though one of my chachas was a journalist in Bangladesh. And in fact, early on he was like, don't do it, it's so hard. One time, if he watches, he's gonna be so upset that I'm saying this, but I'm gonna say it anyway. He told me, মেয়েদের জন্য এটা ভালো না, কারণ you have to be like everywhere and travel and all of that. And yet now, today, he's like my biggest fan, right? But I don't remember what's the earliest time that I knew I wanted to. This is the only thing I've always ever wanted to do, like ever. Oh my God. Well, the reason why I ended up in Bangladesh as a international correspondent is what I actually say, but traditionally it's called foreign correspondence. The irony of being from a place and being a foreigner there is a whole other story. But reporting in Bangladesh changed everything. So I moved there in 2018. To give you a timeline, I graduated college in 2006. So, about a decade. I worked in fashion, I worked in US news, I did a lot of like stories about the Asian diaspora. And I always wanted to go to Bangladesh and report, in South Asia in general. And so I ended up there. And the reason why I was able to go there and actually build a career is because of the Rohingya refugee crisis, right? Because the reality is that the only time the Western media cares about Bangladesh is textiles, right? Some kind of like Islamic revolution that we just keep failing the Western world and don't have, But floods and famines, and even flooding, they don't even cover anymore because they're like, this is a nation that floods, it's a region that floods. But the Rohingya refugee crisis really changed. And not just me, I think there's a lot of diaspora journalists that ended up there because of the Rohingya crisis. I'd never been in a refugee crisis camp before. I mean, I'd never even been in the deep villages in Bangladesh, I went to visit as a kid, but it was all sanitized, and you go to like the richest house in the gram, and everyone, comes, and you don't really understand what life is like there. And so going to the refugee camps was, and basically working from there, in the area for like 2 years was a life-changing experience. But the other thing that really changed my outlook on journalism, but life in general, is I did a story on the chores in Bangladesh. I had no idea. It was assigned to me. I did it for NPR. And I had no idea what I was in for, like at all. And so I get on a boat with this NGO and I go there. And I was like, I thought I had seen the worst in the refugee camps. And then I go to the shores of Bangladesh and I was like, this is insane. Like the fact that there was like, nobody, like there's no outrage over the fact that these people are losing their land continuously and they're just living in wet homes, little kids. I mean, between these two, I was just a changed person forever. I feel like I have really rose-colored lenses on because I see girls that are like 10, 20 years younger than me just killing it. Just killing it, you know?
What do you mean by killing it?
I mean, I think part of the Bengali identity is that Bengali women are fierce, right? Like fierce, like it is not a stereotype, like we just are. And I think that some of that gets lost sometimes because of family pressure, because of, you know, your own, like just society. But so I would like to say that I think that girls and women have come a long way. And I'm talking specifically in the US and New York. I'm not gonna like, I don't think it's fair to paint like the whole diaspora of, you know, Bengali women the same. So, you know, I'm just like proud that that's happening. But I still get emails from very young girls who have read something that I've written. Because along from traditional journalism, I also do a lot of essays. So for example, many years ago, I wrote about the first time I like moved out and like lived on my own, which was like a big deal. My parents were like so upset. And I got, I mean, I don't know, dozens of emails of girls telling me, how did you do it? Did your parents not disown you? Blah, 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 all of these things. So, you know, and I struggle to give advice because my only advice is, you gotta center yourself and decenter your family. Because when you center yourself, everything that you have been taught, all the good parts of your upbringing that you have been taught by your family, by your environment, by society, will automatically filter through you. That is, I am a mother of 2 little girls and I see that. We are sponges when we're young. And, you know, I think that what a lot of previous generations don't understand is that you have to set us free to see what we're capable of doing. And that when we do make mistakes, allow us to come back and come to you and cry to you and even get like yelled at, because that's what my parents did always. So, and if you do not have those kind of parents, then find your own family in the world. I feel like I lived so many different worlds in my like 3-ish years in Bangladesh because the levels of privilege and the levels of not having privilege were insane, right? So like, I'm there in an official capacity. So I had press passes, I had, you know, all kinds of things. Obviously, I have this accent, right? Like I can move in. When I learned about the international clubs, and then also how terrible the American club is, I was, can we just make a whole segment talking trash about the American club in Bangladesh? Like, what do you think you are? Anyway, so, but there were just so many levels of classism that I learned about because I grew up in New York City. I grew up working class. I'm at the bottom of the barrel. I'm a brown Muslim woman who grew up. I was 17 years old when 9/11 happened. That says it all, right? My name is Jennifer because my dad wanted me to assimilate. So I tell him always that it's a blessing and a curse. A blessing because, yeah, I could pretend to be like Mexican or whatever, you know what I mean? And, you know, I have been confused because of my name. But I go to Bangladesh and there's so many layers of classism. So I'm like walking in and I'm like, okay, I already have some privilege, right? Because I live in Dhaka and Bonani and Gulshan because that's where you live when you are coming from the outside world, even though my parents own property in Mirpur. I'm like, oh no, I'm not gonna live there because I already started being, I'm trying so hard not to curse here, right, by the way. But I have to live in those like fancy areas, right? Because that's what you do. And so then I go and like my typical day was I'm in the Rohingya camps and I mean, I'm watching the worst of humanity take place. And then I come back to Dhaka, I fly back to Dhaka in my fancy apartment, I head straight to the salon, I spend like 4 hours there and like become a new person. And then I go and like go to some party in Gulshan or Banani. And I get there and then I'm like, I'm in the choto loke ekhane, because the amount of wealth that there is astonishing. And then there was nobody in those classes that want to talk about what I've seen. So I felt very lonely, right? Even though I'm accepted in in that part of society, I'm not though, right? Because they're also kind of like giggling at the like level of empathy I have, or etc. I'm not saying everyone is like this, but there's a lot of that. And so coming from United States and coming from New York, where you see there's a lot of classism here, but it's not so in your face. And then you go to a place like Bangladesh, specifically Dhaka, and you're like, this is insane. So that was like that was hard for me to kind of take, honestly. So listen, everybody likes to find our things in life. That's just a reality. It was nice. It was nice to like live in that and like not having to make a lot of money to be able to like, afford that or be in that kind of like company, because I'm like earning in dollars and etc. So in the beginning, it bothered me, but I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. And like, also, you're like, you kind of become an elitist too. You're like, yeah, I'm American, like I deserve this, etc., etc. And then I'm like, I'm there. So I don't have a lot of family in Bangladesh. Like everyone immigrated out a long time ago. So when it really hit me was when I started feeling lonely. Because I was like, in the beginning, I loved the like fancy parties. I loved like, just having fun and like letting loose. But then I was like, I can't really talk to anybody here though. And that's when things started kind of bothering me. And that's when I started looking for relationships in other parts of the city, I would say, and started understanding how many different like subgroups of people there are in Dhaka itself.
Yeah, we're going to talk about it.
Okay.
About that class.
Yes. Oh my God. Balance, there is no such thing as balance. I think we have been taught this lie that there's work-life balance. The only time you have work-life balance is when you go to a job that you don't care about and you're just earning a really nice paycheck. Then absolutely at 6 p.m. you should shut it down and go home and be with your family. But if you're doing something that you are thinking about all the time, and even as you're watching your very cute 2-year-old like do the cutest thing and you're still thinking about that story that you still want to write, you're never going to achieve balance, right? Because these are competing like passions in your life. And so, I have a 5-year-old, and so I've been a mother for like, a little over 5 years now. And in the beginning, I felt really guilty about that. And in fact, I actually took a break from journalism for about three years, yeah. And then I came back to it. And I was miserable. I was miserable being away from it. Like honestly, I worked at like a very large nonprofit. I was making good money, blah, 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 blah. But I hated it. And so, but now, and this is gonna sound like all like roses, but I will say that motherhood, you literally created life, and now you're nurturing that life forever, I guess. And that unlocks a level of creativity that I didn't anticipate. I kind of thought that like, okay, I'm a mom and now everything is just gonna go away. And it gave me so much more like drive, because I only have this much time to get things done, right? Like the hardest part of creative work is that you can spend forever writing a song. You can spend forever like, doing research on something. But I'm like, I have from 12 to 5 because my kids are, after school, and then she comes home and then that's it. And so I have to make sure I get everything done in that time. And then when she goes to sleep, I do some more. And I've given up like social life a little bit because of that. Yes, I think I've gotten more ambitious after motherhood, actually. Yeah. I'm still navigating guilt. I don't think I have a handle on that. Now I'm kind of like, I think inherently I'm a little bit self-centered. I think all people that are creatively aligned are.
We all are.
Because otherwise, why would you do this? And you all want accolades? Anybody that creates and says, I don't really care about like getting fame, maybe not fame, but you definitely want recognition for your talent. You definitely want to leave a mark. You want to leave some sort of legacy. So the way I'm navigating my guilt these days is that I'm like, I have two legacies that I want to leave behind. My children, obviously, and then also my work. And because I have two little girls, I'm like, I want them to grow up to be like, my mom was amazing. And she did all this while she was raising us, so that they can go get even higher. So. Living life on your own. I mean, you know, we all are part of some sort of like social structure, so to completely throw it all away is impossible. But I think living life on your own terms means making those decisions every day, right? Like, I think there's a misconception that people who just like do what they want to do, they just always know. They're just like always confident. They're like, yeah, I'm just gonna do this. I don't care. No, I don't think that's true at all. I think people who really live life on their own terms think a lot about every step that they take. Think a lot about the effects of going the opposite direction from what they're being told. So I think it's being very intentional about what kind of life you want and like what kind of future you're trying to build. And it might not at all look the way you intended, but the intention has to be there, I think. Generational trauma, yeah. I mean, I'm still healing. I'm still breaking cycles every day. I think, you know, without giving very specific examples to protect the privacy of people I love, I've had to first deal with it myself that, you know, I didn't do things traditionally. I didn't get married traditionally. I didn't have kids at a traditional age. I don't have a traditional career. But it hurts, you know, it hurts to disappoint the people that you love and loves you. But at the same time, I think at the end of the day, you have to, again, it's that vision. If you see your life a certain way, you just have to keep going towards it. And when it hurts, feel your pain. I think that a large part of healing is like people ignore it, but I think you have to feel it. Like whatever that is, you know, like whether that's like rolling around on the floor and crying or disappearing for like a week, a month, 3 months, I don't know. People have different ways of healing. Going to therapy, you know, like things like that. I think traditional methods, but I think just keep going. And also know that healing is not linear. Like there's memes that you're gonna see about that. What does that mean when people say that? It means that you think that you have tackled, I'll just use a hypothetical example. You've disappointed your parents and the person that you've married, let's just say, right? And you're like, okay, we've gone through the family drama and my parents are fine now, I'm fine now, everything's fine. And you're like at a place where you're like, oh, everything's going good. And all of a sudden you feel like really upset because you still have PTSD from all of that you went through, the drama of getting your parents to accept your parents' partner, for example, right? And then that's when that healing was going up and then all of a sudden it'll crash. So that is the moment when you have to realize that I have to now take care of myself. What does that mean? Maybe I have to go to therapy. Maybe I have to talk to my partner. Maybe I have to talk to my parents, whatever it is. But know that like if you think you've solved a problem, it's always gonna come back. And that you're just gonna have to deal with it differently at that time.